forward. Okay, awesome. So welcome to Junior College Night 2022. It's wild. It's hard to believe it's December 12th, but here we are. So we'll spend the evening going over a bunch of different college-related things. Feel free to put questions in the chat at any point. So I'll do an intro, and then you'll meet other counselors presenting throughout the evening. And I will monitor the chat, and I'll answer things that we may not be covering at some point in the presentation, and then we'll also have time for some questions at the end. So please, feel free to ask questions as we go, and we will get started. Next slide, Sarah. Awesome. So my name is Kate Driver. I am the Director of School Counseling at Advanced Math and Science Academy, and we have a college counseling mission really focused on helping each student identify, apply, and matriculate to colleges that fit their interests, abilities, and goals. We really love getting to know students, and we think that it's really important to know them well so that we can best advise them and help them reach their post-secondary goals. We have students who choose to work after high school, who choose to go into the military, look at apprenticeship and training programs, and so we're happy to help students who are interested in opportunities other than college. But tonight is definitely focused on college and the college process to help your juniors get ready. Next slide. We're going to look at three main areas tonight. The planning and research process. We'll do an overview of what a college application looks like. And then we will also talk about how to navigate the process in as drama-free a way as possible, because we all know that it can be a little bit of a stressful experience for students and families. And so we have some tips for you. All right, next slide. Some future events that are coming up. You received an email, I believe, last week with these dates. So we have an SAT, ACT test optional session coming up with Sexton Test Prep, so that you can learn more about the testing options and help with some thoughts around how to pick the right path. We will be talking about student athlete recruiting late in January. We have a spring college event. It's a tentative admissions panel. We're still working on the details of that, so you'll get more information as we get closer. That will be in April. And then every fall, we have some sort of college financing option. And then we also do a coffee with the counselor session. And that's a time when you can meet with the school counselors and ask any questions that you have about the college process, the financial aid process. That's very wide open and it's super time to connect and ask any questions that you have. We don't come with any agenda. We try to spend time talking through what parents want to know at that time. That's it. So I'm going to start and talk a little bit about how COVID has changed admissions. This slide is different every year, or has been different every year, because each class has experienced a new and different reality of COVID and how it's impacted their education. But a few things have endured through that time. So the first, and probably the most interesting to many students, is that there are more schools than ever that are test optional. So SAT or ACT optional schools. There used to be many, but now I would say we're even at most schools. So we recommend that students think about still taking a test so that they have one if they need it, because there are some schools that are requiring them. There are some schools that use them as an option for merit scholarships, so it's still a good idea to take one and see how you do. But for a student that feels that testing either greatly helps or greatly hinders their application, they have a lot more choices than they did prior to the pandemic. There's also a real emphasis on more holistic review for many schools. So that means looking at as many data points as possible, really looking closely at transcripts, letters of recommendation, and student essays to make decisions around admissions. You'll hear a little bit more about this later. We've also seen a much higher demand for financial aid, which also means there's an increased importance of the timely submission of financial aid forms. Those forms open up in October of every year. And so again, you'll hear more about this at various points, but being on top of the financial aid process is more important than ever. There are tons of options to interact online with schools, lots of different programming. We've also seen an increase in the number of applications per student, which has then translated to, at many schools, a lower rate of admission than before. Every year we get many emails, and the counselors can attest to this as well, that say we've seen an unprecedented number or a historical number of applications. And so I don't say that to make anyone feel nervous, but I think it's good for you to know that we definitely are seeing things look a little bit different in terms of admission and how challenging it is to get into some of the schools that our students are interested in. Okay. So a general timeline, we suggest that students are doing a lot of research on colleges, visiting colleges during the spring of their junior year. Some students have already started, and that's wonderful. We recommend that students take an SAT or an ACT during the winter or spring of their junior year. They're going to be applying during the fall and winter of their senior year, so typically November through January or very early February. And then in the spring of senior year, students are deciding. They often have all of their admissions offers by the beginning of April, and then are committing to a school on May 1st. So students typically know where they'll be going by May 1st. That's really the big picture of what you can expect over the next year. Granted, that's very simplified, but if you follow this timeline, all your students will be in great shape. All right, so next up is planning and research. Again, feel free to put any questions in the chat, and the next counselor's up.
Alrighty, good evening, everybody. I am Chris Dugan. I have students with the last name A through E. So welcome to you all, and welcome especially to parents of my kiddos, my students. So, all right, planning and research. This really is the part where, elements and aspects to think about when you're looking at your aspect and the opportunities to learn more. How I like to word it with all of my students kind of throughout the process, and you might hear me say it a couple times here, is like, these are all kind of pieces of the bigger overall pie, right? So we'll kind of break it down step by step. The first one is going to be finding your fit. So, start thinking about, really for the students, again, we're going to put this all here, but if they're even asking you guys questions as parents, kind of maybe things that you can always kind of go back to and throw out there for them to think about are all these listed here. Locations. So you want to go to a city, a suburb, rural, where specifically that college is located. Are we looking at a large university versus a small college? So, and that the two kind of pieces of the large versus small in lecture and small classes, I like to kind of consider them kind of going hand in hand usually. So the larger universities, that's where you're typically going to see more of your kind of lecture-based classes. Think that like the 200, 300 kind of students in seminars that you see with professors. The smaller colleges you might see your smaller classes that kind of maybe what they're used to now, or maybe even a little bit bigger. Some of the classes I know at AMSA may be like 10 to 15. So think of that in the range of like 20 to 30 maybe. Usually even at the larger universities, once you get deeper into your major, you will see it break down a little bit into some smaller class sizes. But there definitely are those large lecture-based ones for those large universities. So some students go to AMSA, it's a little bit of a smaller school. They're like, I want to get out, go to a bigger school. And some are like, I like the small, close-knit kind of feel. So again, just two kind of other things to think about there. Student organizations. So think about, this can be related to a major or a career that a student's looking into. This can be a hobby. This can be, passion that they have. So there's a wide variety of student organizations. There's student government. So similar to if any students are involved at AMSA student government, there's usually student government organizations. There are different, again, hobbies are kind of major related things. So like there's business societies usually. There are, if a school has a TV station, a radio station, a newspaper, a lot of also cultural clubs and stuff like that. So there's a wide variety of different organizations that students can get into. So if that's important to them, that's something they can look at there. Affordability. So a couple things here, right? Think of public versus private. So some of your public schools, at least in the state, might tend to be a little bit more cheaper than the private schools. So you're looking at things like over total cost, what maybe schools maybe have a little bit more money that they tend to offer for scholarships or grants. We'll talk a little bit of this a little bit more later in the financial aid section as well, but those are kind of the key things you want to look at: the total cost, the aid that schools are able to offer, and then the academic fit. So, what the average kind of GPA range of the students that these colleges are looking at. The major, obviously, that's a big one. Like, depending, does the school have your major? That's probably a pretty big one you want to look at. So these are all the things when you kind of start out, like, what school do I fit at? These are really, really big key aspects to look at. Some unwise reasons to add a school to your list. And we probably hear this at least a couple times, maybe every year, right? Like, oh, where your boyfriend or girlfriend goes, or where your friends are applying to. Maybe not the smartest reason, as I'm sure everybody wants to kind of keep in touch and all that. You never know what's going to change in the future, right? So, you may end up where your friend goes, but if you don't want to necessarily make sure that you don't want to, prioritize, like, oh, I have to go where this person's going, because, hobbies, classes, things change, people change, right? So, the name of the school. So a lot of times, students, parents, we can get hung up on the name of the school. Like, oh, I have to go here. This school is great. The name's everywhere. It pops up. They're telling me I get all this stuff at home. I get all that. Don't necessarily just have to go to a school, or you shouldn't be prioritizing, again, a school just based off of the name specifically. And then because the acceptance rate is high, unless, as it says here, you're actually interested in the school. So, are you really interested truly in the school? Do you want to go there? Can you see yourself going there? I'll get into that in a little bit in the next couple slides, but just because the acceptance rate's high and like, oh, this is a good one for me, is that a place you actually really envision yourself going? Next slide, please. College visits. So these are really, really important. We'll get into both college visits here in this specific slide, but then also college visits to AMSA. Students have 4 excused college visits per year for both junior and senior year. I think we all would encourage them to take advantage of that, because of really, that's your best time to go and like really see and truly envision yourself. Can I see myself here for the next 4 years? So other key things here you can see to kind of maybe base your visits, base your visits around would be visit when students are on campus. Breaks, a lot of times, the high school breaks work out well, because a lot of times the students are still there, right? So February break, students are usually still on college campuses. Same thing with April break, they're usually still there at college campuses. And again, use those. You have 4 excused college visits, so use them wisely, right? Maybe if you're kind of planning a trip or going, maybe book it on a Friday or a Monday, or maybe make it a long weekend, go Thursday, Friday if you can. Use college websites for schedules of those tours and information sessions. That's where you're going to get kind of like the best information and the knowledge in terms of when you might want to schedule them. While you're there, check in with admissions. They're going to give you some really good tips in terms of kind of maybe what to look for, maybe some stats from this past class, anything that they're, kind of going on with the current class, perhaps. Speaking of classes, sit in on actual academic classes. If you can, go to lunches with students, ask them those questions. The tours, the school is trying to sell you just as much as you're trying to get information on them. So they're going to show you all they're going to take you on the kind of the flashy lights tour, right? And show you everything that's great about them. So if you can sit on classes, go to lunch, find out for lack of a better phrase, find the dirt right on them. And when I say that, I don't mean necessarily the bad, but like find out more that they might not necessarily tell you, like the real actual college experience there of what goes on, rather than just like, oh, see, look at this fancy new building and these classes are great. sure they are. Just find out, you want to find out a little bit more information, right? Revisit schools after acceptances have been received. So a lot of times schools call these the admitted students days. Again, excellent times to go again. Ask more questions. Maybe again, same thing. You can sit on specific classes here. Ask about majors if you have any thoughts or questions on that. Meet with a dean per se, or another professor. And other things you could do. You could check in with again the campus safety. Do a self-guided tour. So in addition to the tour that you're on, walk around yourself. Walk around the college. Walk around the area, the outside, right outside the college, right? Kind of see what's around there, not just that college specifically. Can you envision yourself again there? Are you comfortable there? Comfortable kind of leaving campus and going around there. And oftentimes when you go on visits, if you're going and staying kind of overnight, say if you're going for, out of state or anything like that, a lot of times there are discounts at, local hotels or inns, sometimes restaurants if you set up your visit around a certain time, or have that kind of like we do when you have the form to sign out and sign that you went on a visit. Similar to that, a lot of hotels, inns, and stuff like that will offer discounts there. Looking at visits to AMSA, a lot of college reps will visit AMSA. We had a lot come back this fall. You can sign up, students can sign up in Naviance. Our amazing counseling admin assistant, Miriam Line, does a great job coordinating those and setting those up. So if students kind of are having a hard time, especially in the fall, is usually when these visits pick up, kind of signing up or finding where they are, they can come down to our counseling suite in the upper school, and she will happily help them sign up. Bring questions at these visits, be professional, kind of think of these as interviews, right? So oftentimes 9 times out of 10, these admissions rep that are at the schools are the actual ones reviewing students' applications. So, it's a good opportunity for them to kind of introduce themselves there, ask any questions that they have, really allow the colleges and the college reps to kind of put a face to that name when they're reading that application. They can, if they get the application, they're like, hey, I remember this student, and it gives them an opportunity to make that positive, lasting impression. So, next slide, sorry. Other opportunities, pretty much similar to what we kind of just went over. There's online info sessions. So if you can't get out there, if you're looking at somewhere out of state, open houses, a lot of things now, after COVID, there's a lot of online tours, online open houses, online college fairs. Again, if you're really busy, you can't get to one. They do a lot of these virtually. Student panels. So similar to what we said kind of earlier on, being an admissions panel, there's often student panels as well for different schools. So sometimes specifically major related or just overall school. Meet the faculty opportunities again. So, professors, deans, researchers, stuff like that. And again, online tours, so similar to those online info sessions that we said. And finally, kind of while you're evaluating colleges, pay attention to how you feel on campus. Again, these are going to be the next, ideally, realistically, 4 years that the student you are going to be on campus. So you have to feel comfortable. It's got to be a place that you can truly see yourself at. So if you're even the slight hesitation, think about that. Why? What is that hesitation about? Is it something like really, really major? Or is it, just that uncertainty of like, okay, this is the first time I'm venturing out, which is totally normal and understandable, but you got to make sure you're comfortable kind of being there. Speak to current students. So again, when you're evaluating, when you're looking at the school, when you're visiting, if you do know students that a neighbor, former student that went there, it's good to kind of pick their brain and get any information there. Be open-minded at the same time. Kind of, there's colleges are going to provide a lot of new opportunities. So, kind of be open-minded to those and being flexible. Try to meet with a faculty member in your program like we talked about. See if you can sit in on a class, and then again, spend some time off that tour. The tour, I can't say it's enough. The tour's going to show you all the great things. They're trying to sell you just as much as you're looking to try to sell yourself, in that application. So spend some time kind of off the tour, if you will, or off-roading on the and kind of, doing your own kind of tour to kind of see, let me look at the classes. Where would my classes be if I'm taking this major? Where would I like to have lunch? Where could I see myself hanging out? you know, somebody that really likes fitness and going to the gym, like, let me take a look at their recreational facility, right? So stuff like that. Again, what's important to you is what you want to look at when you're evaluating colleges. Think I'm going to pass it off now to Sarah Morrissey. So take it away, Sarah.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Morrissey. I am one of the counselors at AMSA. I have last names PL through the end of the alphabet. And I am going to kind of piggyback off of what Chris said and start talking a little bit about building your college list. So we encourage students, you know, this process can be very time consuming. There's a lot of moving pieces. One of my favorite things / least favorite things to say is that every college is different. Every college has, although they may have similar deadlines, most of them do have different deadlines. So you want to be aware of when their early action deadline is, when their regular decision deadline may be, when's their financial aid? Do you have to do a priority deadline if you're planning on applying for or receiving merit scholarships? So there's a lot of different separate pieces to this whole process. So staying organized is really, really important, and being strategic. Just because you're applying to 1 or 2 schools early action doesn't mean that you have to apply to every school that on your list early action. We want to make sure that through the process, when you're actually sitting down to apply to schools, that you're putting your best foot forward. So if that means that you want colleges to see your first term senior grades, then maybe early action isn't necessarily the right step for you. You might want to consider waiting for regular decisions so they have a chance to look at that full first half of senior year and have those grades to then go off of when they're evaluating your application. So when you're creating your list, these are the areas that we kind of categorize each of the schools into: a probable, target, a reach, or a far reach. So your probables are going to be, or you know, in the past we've called them safety schools. We've kind of tried to change our language a little bit around this over the last couple of years because nothing's necessarily a sure thing. But these are the schools that you either meet or exceed the academic profile of a typical student admitted to that school. So you're a really good academic fit, or maybe even a little bit higher of an academic fit for that particular institution. Targets are going to be the schools that you're right on par with. So you meet most of their averages, and it's a really good chance that you're going to get into that school, but you know, we can't say it's a guarantee. Reaches and far reaches are going to be those schools that you have that are, you know, within that 40% or over, 40% or under acceptance rate. These are going to be your more competitive schools. And they're going to be the schools that, even if you meet the academic profile, because of their competitiveness, doesn't necessarily guarantee that you'll be accepted just because on paper you've met the statistics. Another thing when building your list is really to focus on that this is your list, and making sure that it fits your needs based off of both of your academic as well as your financial profile. We'll talk a little bit more about the financial piece, but we always want to make sure, especially for that probable section, is that we have schools on your list that are going to be schools that you get into, but also that are going to be a good financial fit. We want to make sure that you're going to be able to pay for the schools that you've gotten into and can afford to go there. And you're not just kind of dropping your hat into the ring of a school that maybe is just totally not something that you can, that you're willing to take hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans out in. And also kind of looking at, you know, your intended major, what you're going to be making when you come out. So kind of thinking through that whole financial piece. And within the creating the balance list, one thing that I always say to the students that I'm working with is that I'm never going to tell you not to apply to a particular school. We want you to obviously reach for the stars and have some of those reaches and far reaches on your list. But when it comes to those schools that are your targets and your probables, we want to make sure that you love those schools. We want to make sure that they are schools that you're going to be excited to get into and to go to. So it's something to just kind of keep in mind, that we definitely want you to do those reaches, but also to have a really good list, that every school that ends up being on your list is a school that you can picture yourself at, in a school that you would want to attend. All right. So as you're kind of designing your list, some of the things to take into consideration would be, or some data to use would be your GPA. So you want to make sure that you're looking at your both your unweighted as well as your weighted GPAs. In many cases, colleges are going to recalculate your GPA based on the scale that they use. It puts everybody that's applying to that particular school on an equal playing field. So most schools will recalculate GPAs, but at least utilizing your current GPA from AMSA, most of the time they do factor out to be relatively similar. Some schools pull out some of the elective courses that we offer, so it just depends on the school and the program that you're applying for. Looking at the selectivity of a program. So in some cases, when you're applying to a school, you may be applying to a very particular program. For instance, you're looking at computer science. If you happen to be applying to the computer science program at UMass Amherst, that's one of their top programs. So the GPA in the selectivity of that program and the acceptance rate of that program is going to be much lower than maybe the overall acceptance rate for that particular college. So, you know, UMass tells us every year, Eisenberg School of Business, their computer science program and their nursing program are their top 3 majors on campus. So those programs are much more selective. Students applying to those programs are held to a higher standard, and the admit rate is much lower for those programs than it is for, say, a student going in for education or general studies or history. Colleges are also looking at the rigor of your transcripts. So they're looking to see what classes that you took in high school. And did you take classes that coincided with what your intended major is? They will also look at our program of studies as a whole, so they have an idea of what classes AMSA offers. Obviously, if AMSA, we don't necessarily have a robust fine arts program or an opportunity for much more than for like drama or theater, you know, outside of what we have to offer in comparison to some schools, but they will look to see, you know, what we have and kind of, you know, if you're applying specifically for an art program, you may be viewed a little bit, you'll be viewed in terms of like what we offer, not what we don't offer. Test scores, like Ms. Driver talked about a little bit earlier, many schools are going that test optional route. And they have made it a point to let us know that, you know, if you're going test optional, then they just don't consider the scores. If you decide to have your scores considered, you'll want to use those. So looking at what the school's average test scores are is really important, because that will help you to strategically decide whether or not you're going to submit your scores because they're going to help your application, or not submit your scores. And then also paying close attention to the acceptance rate. So really, like I mentioned earlier, if the admit rate is below 40%, it's going to be a reach for everyone, regardless if you're number 1 or 2 in the top in the class, or you know that your GPA is extremely high. If it's 40%, it's still a reach for everybody. And we are seeing, as applications are more accessible to students, students have the opportunity to visit schools in a wide variety of different ways. We are seeing that more students are applying to more colleges, which then again makes colleges more competitive to get into. So we try to be as straightforward with students when we're working with them and letting them know what we think of the schools in terms of, is it a reach, a target, or a probable? And we do that because we want to make sure that we're developing realistic expectations. It's great to have these schools on your list, but we just want to make sure that we're also focusing on other schools that fall into that, target probable. All right, so some of the tools that we use and will encourage students to use throughout this process would be, first and foremost, Naviance. We do a lot of things within Naviance. That's how we use Naviance for all the sending of all of our materials. But in regards to building your list, they have a great super match option, as well as which basically you can put in criteria, do you want a big school, small school, all those kind of components that Mr. Dugan talked about earlier. It has all of those features that you can fill in. You can put in your GPA, your test scores, and it will produce a list of colleges that match the criteria that you're looking for. College Board also has a very similar feature. They also have a comparison option, which can be really nice. In terms of style, sometimes College Board is a little bit easier to navigate and look through versus the Naviance super match, but both work really well. Naviance also has the scattergrams in it. It's really important when you're looking at those scattergrams to know that it's the data that's being pulled into those scattergrams is AMSA specific data. So it's pulling in, for the student side, other students from AMSA that have applied to that particular school in the last 3 to 4 years. So students can kind of compare their profile to other AMSA profiles, and it will show, did that particular student get waitlisted, denied, accepted? Did they apply early action versus regular decision? It will show a lot of data for, kind of what an AMSA application looks like on the other end at the colleges. It's also, in terms of the scattergrams, just because it is AMSA specific data, it does skew some of the college data too. So that's really important to look at. Don't base a decision or what you think is a reach, safety, or target only on what you're looking at the scattergrams, because it can be off. Like the average accepted GPA can be much different than what the college is actually reporting out as their average GPA. The New England Board of Higher Education offers the tuition breaks for Mass residents. So this is basically all of the schools in New England. If there is a program, a particular major that is not offered at one of the UMass colleges or universities, but it's offered at the University of Maine, you can actually get in-state tuition at the University of Maine to go to school there if you're under that particular program. There has been a few of the colleges within, or the universities within New England, that have also just kind of gone above and beyond the tuition breaks and offered different financial aid packages to students in Massachusetts because they're trying to draw students into some of those schools. But those are on a year-to-year basis. So as we get that information, we give that out to students as well. The other thing that we really encourage families to do, especially now, is to start looking at the net price calculators. The government requires every college and university to have a net price calculator on their website. Most of the time it's found on the financial aid page. And basically what you can do is you can go in, you can add in your estimated family contribution, which is done through you can pull that number through FAFSA. You can put in the student's GPA, their test scores, if you want those considered. In different schools have different additional criteria that you can put in, but basically it gives you a number of approximately how much it would cost to attend that particular school if a student was to be accepted. Obviously it's not a guarantee, but it gives you a good kind of window of what the financial aid package would look like and how much a student would have to pay to go on a particular year to that particular school. So this is a really helpful tool for families to use as you're developing your list to make sure that it is doable and that the price of a particular school is something that you're going to be able to afford. And you can kind of get an idea of like what you might qualify for in merit scholarship or aid or grants. All right, so we talked a little bit about the cost and financial aid, but basically the expected family contribution is really the need is what the government and our college thinks that you need. So obviously we know it's not an accurate representation. If it was, college would be a heck of a lot more affordable, I think. But it's what the college deems that you, or the government deems that you need in terms of affording to go to that particular school. So need-based aid is done through the federal government through the FAFSA form that opens up in October of each year. Students would fill that out as well as the family would parents fill out and they submit it to colleges, and you'll get what I said before, like that expected family contribution. That amount is what the government is saying that you would qualify for. Merit-based aid is given typically through the admissions process. So they'll look at a student's academic profile. If they're admitted to the school, they may fall within the window of merit scholarships, and those can have a variety of different ranges. Other things to consider would be, are you a public school on paper is typically cheaper or more affordable than a private school. However, that being said, if you are looking at a public institution outside of Massachusetts, you would be paying out-of-state tuition, which in a lot of ways can be right around the same as a private school price as well. So just because it's public doesn't necessarily mean it's affordable per se. The in-state tuition for Massachusetts is relatively affordable, but once you go out of state, you're paying out-of-state tuition, which can be more costly. Private schools, although they may have a higher sticker price, if you are in that probable in terms of your academic profile, so it's a school that you are, you have a higher GPA than what their average GPA is that they're reporting out, your scores exceed what their average score is, you become a student that the private institution wants to attract. And the way they do that is by offering more merit aid. So sometimes when you're kind of the big fish in a smaller pond, you end up with more merit money, and you can actually, when you start to look at things on paper, you may see that the private institution is actually more affordable than even a Massachusetts public institution. So it's really important to do those cost calculators and to do out all the numbers ahead of time so you have an idea of what is actually going to be more affordable for you as a family. And looking at what you think you may qualify for, so you can do the research to know and utilize it to your advantage. So the more information you know about that financial piece, the better your questions can be when you go to visit colleges. You can meet with financial aid counselors. They're always willing to talk to prospective families. You can talk about different merit options or grants that are available to students. So really knowing the whole picture so that you can have those really good conversations to make sure that you're, getting the best bang for your buck. All right. So additional things for you to consider as you're going through this process is we know that the students at AMSA are amazing, and almost everybody is going to be successful, really wherever they go. But it's really, really important to pay attention to the environment of the schools that you're looking at and making sure that you're picking a school that you know that you're going to have the most success at. In thinking realistically about what you're willing to put in academically, what you've done, how you've done in the past. Sorry, hold on. And your ability to pay for college. So thinking about all of these things during the college search process, so that way, when you're actually going to apply to your schools, you're not setting yourself up for disappointment. We want to make sure that everything is realistic and that you're going to have some really good options when it's all said and done. It happens inevitably, you're going to have probably 1 or 2 disappointments on your list of schools that maybe you don't get into, but really making sure that you stack those applications so that you are getting some really good news and that you're going to be at a school that you're going to be really excited to be at and that you're going to thrive at. So kind of to echo, similar to what I was just saying, don't fall in love with just one school and find probable schools that you actually like. So it's really important. Don't put all of your eggs in one basket. I always get nervous every year when a student comes to me and they only have one school on their list and they really just want to focus on that one application. I always want to make sure that students have a backup plan or maybe 2 backup plans at least. And then making sure that those schools that we do label as probables are schools that you really like and are really truly interested in. These are going to be the schools that are going to, have the most merit for you. They're going to be the schools that probably are going to provide more financial aid or a better opportunity for you financially. And they're probably the schools that are a better academic fit. So just making sure that those schools that are those probables on your list are schools that you really, truly do love. All right, and now I'm going to pass it along, I think to Ms. Culhane, but I'm not sure. It's either Ms. Culhane or Ms. Corallo.
It's Ms. Corallo.
Oh, sorry, I messed up.
Hi,
Okay.
everybody. We're going to talk a little bit about what actually goes into your student's application now. What are the actual items that they're going to focus on? And Sarah, you can do the next slide. So as far as what goes in the application, your students are going to apply and use either Common App, which is most schools at this point are on Common App, not all, but many are. So your students can apply through Common App to the colleges that are on there or directly to the college itself. Some students get waivers, they're able to apply directly to that college. Either way is fine. Common App makes it a little bit easier, and we'll be helping students with that a little bit in the as we get into the winter and the spring. Your students are also going to be required in most cases to write an essay. And so that will be for all colleges. They usually choose from one of, I believe, 8 to 10 prompts. It does change year to year for Common App prompts, and they can send that to all of their colleges. Supplemental questions, which kind of it goes in addition to the essay, that are specific to those colleges. So colleges will ask questions like, why is it that you want to attend this school in particular? What is the program that you're looking for at this particular school? And we've seen some really interesting questions. I think I saw one this year from a really selective college asking about a favorite ice cream flavor. So it can be really, really a real big variety of questions that they ask in those supplemental questions, but those will be just as important as the essay questions. Letters of recommendation. So I'll get into the specifics around that, but typically the colleges are going to ask for 1 to 2 teacher letter recommendations and a counselor letter of recommendation as well. Your students will submit a transcript. So to be able to have colleges see all of their courses that they've taken and their grades and their levels on those courses. And that will be sent directly from AMSA to those colleges and universities, along with our school profile. And if any parents are interested in looking at our school profile, feel free to take a look at AMSA's website. It really provides a lot of context to colleges around what our school is all about, what our classes mean, and sort of breaking it down a little bit for colleges so that they're familiar with our school. I won't do a ton on test scores. I know Ms. Driver and Ms. Morrissey went into it a lot already. But if a student chooses to submit test scores, those will be a part of the application as well, and they can be sent directly from College Board or ACT to the colleges. And in some cases, which we'll work with your student on, and your student can definitely take a look at different colleges to find out their requirements, but some allow to do what's called self-reporting. And so in that case, they wouldn't need them to be sent directly from the institution, but they want to check their colleges as those come up. And then the last 2 items are only if applicable for your student in that college. One is an interview. Every college is different again. Some colleges are going to recommend an interview. Some, like UMass Amherst, don't even have interviews. So it really depends on that school. A lot of times interviews are optional. And if your student really wants to explain something in person, or they really want to elaborate on their application and be able to talk it through a little bit, having an interview might be a really good option for them if it's something that the college is at least offering. And then portfolio, again, is if applicable. So if you're a student who's going into, for instance, an art program, then you're more than likely going to have to submit a portfolio. So we encourage you to work with your art teachers on that, to put that together as well. Okay, Sarah, you can change the slide. So as far as the testing, like Sarah, I think mentioned earlier, we do recommend that all students at least take the SATs or ACTs, just so that you have it as an option, in case even one of your schools ends up requiring it, either for merit scholarships or for your actual application. You can start testing in winter, spring of your junior year. You don't really want to take it any later than at the very, very latest December of your senior year, but preferably taking that second time around, maybe in September, October. Many colleges, like they said before, are going to be test optional. When colleges say test optional, they really do mean it. They're not going to penalize your student for not submitting test scores. Most college admissions reps that we've talked to have said that about 50% submit scores and 50% or so don't submit scores. UMass Amherst already told us about their early admissions and said that the majority of students did not submit test scores. So it really depends on the college, but we just want to assure you that your student will not be penalized for not submitting their scores. It's just that the admissions counselors are going to be looking more closely at other parts of their application. So looking at it from that holistic approach, they're just simply not going to consider them. And then for anybody who still remembers them, we just want a reminder, there's no more SAT subject tests. So those are gone, and those are not something that your students will have to worry about anymore if anybody had questions about those. And Sarah, you can hit the next slide. Okay. So as far as teacher recommendations, we recommend that our students ask 2 core academic teachers. We typically ask them to think about somebody from the humanities side, so English, history, the language, and somebody from a STEM side, so math or science, something along that, those two different disciplines. Because we do see some colleges that want one from both. Not every school will want that, but at least if a student asks somebody from each of those disciplines, they'll have those two available. Obviously, something to think about as well is what your student, if they have an idea of what they might be majoring in, they could, think about who they want to ask based on that as well. Certainly, again, back to art, if they're going to be going into an art field, they'll want to ask one of their art teachers, or, they're going into engineering, maybe they're asking a physics teacher, chemistry teacher, something along those lines. So thinking about that as well. And asking in person, preferably, just really having that face-to-face conversation with that teacher. Would you be willing to write me a letter of recommendation? And then we will get this out to our students and remind them, but it's really important that they fill out the teacher recommendation form that we're going to be sending to them. Teachers really do read these. It helps them write a really strong letter for the student. So it's important that students fill this out and take it seriously when they do complete it in the spring. The teacher recommendation really focuses on the student's academic performance. So how did they do in that particular class? We're going to recommend that you ask your teachers this spring. Most colleges really do want to see a teacher from your junior year, potentially senior year as well. If you need to ask somebody that late. But they don't really want to see definitely not somebody as far back as 9th grade unless you're having them again as an 11th or 12th grader. So really thinking about this year being a really core year to ask for a teacher letter recommendation. And it's a good opportunity. We're only in mid-December to, if you're not really sure, your student hasn't really built a relationship with any of their teachers, now's the time to do it. Have them go to their office hours, really start having conversations with that teacher, really building that relationship with that teacher. It can go a really long way. So we'll remind students about that and getting that out there. And then, of course, after your teacher writes the student's letter of recommendation, following up with that teacher with a thank you note to really show gratitude for the time that they're putting into it. Okay, so you can change it. Okay, and then we're going to ask that students have a counselor recommendation. Most colleges require that as well, especially if they're on Common App. In Google Classroom, which we'll be teaching with the juniors coming in January in our junior seminar, we're going to be posting what's called the counselor recommendation questionnaire. Again, it's kind of similar to the teacher questionnaire, where we're going to be asking some specific questions of your students. And really ask that your students put a lot of thought and care into these responses, because they really do help us as counselors get to know your students even more and really write a strong letter of recommendation for them. As soon as they finish that, they can actually set up what's called our junior meetings with us as their counselors. And that happens really anywhere from January through April. They can set that up as soon as they've done their counselor recommendation questionnaire in Google Classroom. We'll meet with your students. We'll go over that questionnaire, ask them questions. We'll start to look at their list with them and kind of go over the process in more detail, and just be in a really good shape to write them a really strong letter and make sure that they're in really good shape in the college process as they're going along. And in addition to that junior meeting, just going to put a plug in that your students' school counselors are available to meet with your students as much as they need to. Most of the juniors by now, I think, have our Calendly, access to our Calendly to be able to set up appointments. So if at any point during the year they need that extra support, it absolutely utilize us. Come during study, make an appointment to do that. In addition to that big junior meeting that they're going to have in the spring. We'll send something out to families as well, called the family questionnaire. Typically due back June 1st to us. Again, you guys know your students, best of all. And so you may have some really, really great insight as to what your students have done, the strengths that they have. And your students might forget some of these things as well, or maybe feel uncomfortable sharing their strengths or talking, kind of bragging about themselves. You guys can really shed some light on your students. And we all look through our family questionnaires and use a lot of the information that we get from parents. So please, as it comes up in the spring, please do fill that out, so that we can capture some of that for your students. And again, as a counselor recommendation, we're focusing on a little bit on academics, of course, and more general versus like the teacher recommendations, which are really specific to those classes. We're going to talk about it as a big picture academic. We're going to talk about the community involvement, co-curricular involvement, sports, things like that, awards that your students have received, and then personal characteristics. So all of that kind of combines really big picture for your student for that letter. Right, Sarah, you can flip it. So I talked a little bit about the AMSA profile that you can check out on the website. It really helps provide context, like I said, to colleges to be able to get an idea of what AMSA is all about, what our grading system looks like. We, on our transcript, we include your students' classes, every class they took from 9th, 10th, and 11th, and then going into 12th grade. That includes their GPA and grades from all of those classes. So it includes the cumulative GPA at the bottom of your transcript, on a 5.0 scale. We do have a weighted GPA, so different classes, depending on what your students are taking, are going to be given different weights, depending on whether it's a CP, honors, AP, or accelerated course. I believe Ms. Morrissey mentioned this, I'm not sure if it was somebody else. Colleges often recalculate that GPA to fit their 4.0 scale so that everybody's kind of on the same page. But we do show a weighted GPA on our GPA on our transcript with those classes being considered, whether they're higher weight, and it goes over it in the AMSA profile, but AP courses, for instance, are given 1 full point. Honors courses given a half a point and things like that. So you can check that out as well on our site. And we do not rank our students. So whenever that comes up, if your student is asked about their rank, it would just be not applicable. So application types, we talked a little bit mentioned this a little bit earlier as well. Really, if you can take one thing away around the application types, your student, as far as when they apply to school, should be applying when they are ready, when their application is going to be strongest. And if your student has questions about that, they can certainly come talk to our counselors. There are going to be some instances which I'll go over in a minute, where they may need to apply earlier depending on a competitive major. But other than that, really think about your student, when is going to be their strongest application to apply, not when are their friends applying, when is going to be their strongest application, what grades are going to really reflect their strongest application. Early decision is binding. Early decision means you have to really be sure that your student wants to attend that school. You as a family have talked about the cost of that school and use the cost calculator. And it is absolutely where that student wants to go. Because if that student gets in via early decision, they are going to attend that school and have to withdraw all other applications. Okay, so early decision, otherwise called ED, is a binding agreement. Restrictive early action is not binding, but it's a little bit limited. Okay, so some schools we see that a little bit less, but that is a possibility as well for one of the applications. Early action, not restrictive, just regular early action, is you apply early and you find out early. Early action is not binding. You can apply to as many schools as you want to early action. There's no, it is not binding whatsoever. Okay, so ED binding, early action not binding. Rolling decision. Those are typically about a 6 to 8 week turnaround, and those are for colleges that will accept applications until enrollment is full. So sometimes those can even have a later deadline in the summer, but oftentimes there are priority deadlines with that. But when you see straight up rolling admissions, those can have a variety, and they'll take students right up until their classes are full, or that class is full. Regular is typically, it really depends, but usually we start to see those deadlines anywhere from December, January through March. And that typically with a regular application deadline, students are going to have colleges be able to see those first and potentially second quarter grades before that college makes a decision. Okay. And then priority deadline. So those are often connected to sometimes to merit aid. So, UMass Lowell has some merit aid in their priority deadline for early action 1 and early action 2. So it is something to consider if your student might qualify for that merit aid, especially if their application is ready to go. And then sometimes it's also connected to selective majors. So you might see nursing, for instance, at a college might have a priority deadline, an earlier deadline overall. So again, just want to drive the point home that your student should make that decision based on their application and when it's going to be strongest. Okay, and I think that's it. On to Ms. Culhane.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wiley Culhane. I'm one of the counselors here in the upper school at AMSA, and I work with students whose last names begin with M through PI. Ms. Driver and I work together with these students. I know that we've presented a lot of information tonight. So hopefully in this section, which is our last section, we're going to kind of talk about your role and our role and how we can help navigate the process. Really, it's all about working together. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to start where the student is. Okay, that's going to be different for every student. You may have a student who has been thinking about college since their freshman year, has been researching. Maybe they have an older sibling, so they've had the opportunity to go on a number of college visits, and they have a sense of what kind of college they want to attend. That's awesome. But for every student like that, there are more who really have no idea where they want to begin. So it's really important that we start where the student is. Both of those type of student profiles is fine. We have to keep in mind that these are juniors, they're still young, and many of them don't really know what they want yet. Okay, and we're all here to help and support them in that journey. It is also important to note that we want to kind of put the student in the driver's seat. And we want to do that while we're supporting and empowering them. Okay. We want to help the student to own the process and allow them to have a voice. Okay. Really, colleges want to see students reaching out. Okay. Communicate with those college reps and set up their own interviews. They reach out to set up meetings with us as their counselor, and they write their essay and fill out their application on their own. We want to foster independence in our students, and colleges want to see that as well. They want to see that your student is interested in the college. Okay, that's who the customer is. So we really want to help them own the process. And we want to do this while we're setting reasonable expectations as well. Okay, so have those conversations with your kids early about, how this process is going to work for your family, what you're there to help and support them with, what might be affordable versus not affordable for your family, so that everyone is kind of going into this with the same expectations. Okay, Sarah, next slide. How can families help? While your kid is driving, you're still in the car with them, okay? So like I said earlier, having those conversations, being there to support and guide them, but giving them some independence to make some of the moves and decisions on their own. Be mindful of the pressures of senior year. We're just kind of wrapping up. We're starting winter now. But the fall of senior year can be a very stressful time for students. So keep that in mind. And that's something that we're always cognizant of in our office. And we are here to support and to care for your students when they're at school. Have realistic expectations. Wherever they get in, you'll be proud of them. Okay. The college admissions game is not the same one that we played when we were going to college. Okay. There's a lot of factors that are in the mix now. So we really want to stress that we'll be proud of them and we want to help them set some realistic expectations. Planning college visits, tracking virtual college events. These are things that I believe Mr. Dugan spoke about earlier, but these are great opportunities for families. You know, it shouldn't just be your student that's going to visit the schools. You know, you're a player in this too. So make sure that, you know, parents and siblings, you know, definitely go and try to visit some of these colleges. You can help manage the financial aid process. Again, having those discussions about what's affordable and keeping in mind the deadlines and the forms that are required. As Ms. Caralla mentioned, we are going to ask you to fill out a family questionnaire. So just be on the lookout for that and fill that out in a timely fashion. That really helps us. Encourage your student to have a shareable system to keep track of information. Most of our students are familiar with Google Docs, and it's a great tool to use to kind of create a spreadsheet and have that so that everyone can have access to it in the family. Some other ideas, help students register for standardized tests, offer transportation, supplies, and help them with sending their scores. Make sure students are aware of AMSA school policies and meeting deadlines. You'll probably receive a number of emails from our department through our admin assistant. Please make sure you're reading those, and you can offer gentle reminders to your juniors about some of the things that they have coming up that they have to keep track of. Other ideas, track decisions, help with supplementary materials, etc. That's really when you're getting down to the nitty-gritty of things, you know, later on in senior year, but housing forms and additional information if on a wait list, etc. So those are some things that you can help your student with. Our role as counselors, we are here to help them develop and hone their list. We're going to be working a lot with them in junior seminar and senior seminar, and we're going to be talking a lot about coming up with a list that is smart and that's tailored to each individual student. We are here to help them facilitate the application process and to act as a resource. Obviously, we write our counselor letters of recommendation and we send all materials to the colleges. We're always available to provide support, but particularly in junior and senior seminar. These are classes that your students will be taking. Junior seminar will start this January and run through the spring. And then senior STEM will run first semester of their senior year. Those are great opportunities for our students to you know, use us as a resource to ask questions, to get some individualized help one-on-one, and to kind of be a part of a class where we're talking a lot about a lot of these topics. And we really encourage students to use that time wisely. There will be some downtime where we ask them to work on their lists or work on applications. And we certainly hope that they're using that time to do so. That's important. And counselors can do more with advance notice. So please encourage your students to reach out to us if they need help. Okay, we cannot chase, badger, pressure, or micromanage all of our students. It's just not helpful for them. We want them to be a part of the process and to take some ownership for some of this. Junior seminar. As I mentioned earlier, junior seminar will start in January. These are some of the topics that we will touch upon. We're going to do a Naviance how-to. We'll show them some of the tools that Naviance has to offer. We're going to introduce the junior questionnaire and encourage them to start filling them out and turning it into us soon. SAT and ACT testing and letters of recommendation. So we'll talk about those items. Finding your fit and interest surveys. Naviance has a number of different surveys that students can take in order to help them find some schools that might interest them. or even some careers that might interest them. So there's a number of different surveys on there that we'll kind of introduce students to. And then we'll definitely be looking in depth at the college search tools and building your list. Lastly, we'll also be talking about essays. I believe we'll be going into the English classes and working with juniors one-on-one to talk about essays, give some examples and prompts and some helpful do's and don'ts when it comes to writing essays. Many of your students will have an assignment to write their college essay over the summer, which is great. We want them to get a jump start on that as soon as they can. And then moving on, senior seminar, again, that starts right up in the fall when we start school. We'll do a class overview and we'll talk about senior year in Naviance, what we want students to do on that platform in senior year. We'll talk about components of the application and who's responsible for what. Students will have the opportunity to create a Common App account, and will be instructed to link their Naviance and Common App accounts together. We'll talk more about testing and financial aid, scholarship opportunities. As I mentioned earlier, there will be time during the school day to work on applications during seminar classes, and we definitely want students to take advantage of that. Again, students will have direct contact with a counselor on a regular basis, and they can always ask questions, and we really want them to use that time wisely. There'll be a lot of reminders from counselors on deadlines and whatnot as well. So that's kind of senior seminar in a nutshell. The focus of junior year, you know, to start developing a college list, start thinking about some of those big questions that Mr. Dugan spoke about at the opening of this: size, location, you know, what type of campus they picture themselves on, how far away from home they might want to be, program of study. So start developing a broad college list. I always tell students that their #1 job is to be the best student they can be. So to continue to work on their schoolwork and to get strong grades, participate in meaningful activities. You know, we really want students to participate in activities that mean something to them and not just ticking off a box, a checkbox, okay? So find those activities that are meaningful in their lives. Build relationships with teachers. Again, keeping in mind that we're going to be asking teachers for letters of recommendation. So continuing to work on relationship building with both teachers and counselors. Again, Ms. Corallo mentioned we are here for your students. They can, not only will they see us during seminar classes, but they can set up appointments with us as needed. So we're always happy to meet with them. Create a testing plan and create a resume. That's something that I think is really helpful, and it is part of Naviance. They can create a resume on their own, but Naviance also has a template, and it asks for a variety of different stuff aside from just work experience. Okay, we want to learn more about what they've been up to over the course of the past 4 years, whether that's, you know, clubs and activities or sports teams or work, what have you. Creating that resume can be really helpful for us, especially when it comes time to writing that letter of recommendation. What else? And then engage with counselor when picking classes for their senior year. We want to be a part of that process as well. I think that's it. Ms. Driver will probably be on to say goodbye. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks to all the counselors. So we'll open it up for questions now. I've been answering questions on and off in the chat. I also put a link in a couple of times of a junior year packet for families. It has a lot of good information in it. You'll see our content information, some books that we recommend if you're interested in doing more reading, information and test dates for the SAT and ACT, and then a bunch of information about how to schedule a junior meeting and what that looks like for students. And then lastly, and this is probably the thing you want the most, is a to-do list for parents or guardians. Because again, as Ms. Culhane said, there's a lot to do, but we want parents to let students do some of it and really own the process, but we do have a list of things that we think are helpful. So you can take a look at that. Okay, so we've got a question in the chat. Do you complete the FAFSA once October of senior year? You actually are going to complete the FAFSA every year that your student is in college. So you will do it in the senior year and then again, their freshman year of college and so on. So it's important to keep that on the kind of fall rotation of things that you're doing, even when your student gets into school. We know that typically colleges and universities do a fair amount of reminders for students around filling out their FAFSA for the following year. So they will definitely get communications from the school when they're attending about that, which is really helpful. Great question. Other questions? Everyone's typing furiously. We'll wait a couple of moments. Are there any questions that the counselors feel like we often get at this time that are good to cover? We had some questions about GPA that I answered in the chat. Students have access to a weighted and an unweighted GPA in Naviance. You'll eventually have Naviance access. So hopefully that will get you started, and we're here. We're happy to help students and answer questions from parents as well. So I will send out a recording of this event, and then we will also we'll send you the packet and a couple of other things so that you have all of these things if there are any parts that you want to review. And yes, you may absolutely unmute to ask the question. That's fine.
Okay, I'm not Noah, I'm Noah's mom.
I figured that.
I'm wondering, how does Naviance handle on the scattergrams now? If a student, if you have their scores, but they don't use them to, they go test optional, do they just not show up on the scattergram? Because that a lost like data point, or like how does it handle that?
Sarah, do you know?
Because it tells if they get in, and
yeah,
so
it's a great question.
That is not a piece of data that Naviance tracks, because the student is individually selecting within the Common App when they're submitting their application, whether or not they want those scores to be considered. So typically, it's more counselor anecdotal information that they may know when because we can see the back end. So we can actually, on our end, we can see who those individual students are, where when a student is looking at it, they only see the numbers. So we may know a little bit more of who submitted, who didn't submit, and kind of what our guideline typically is for students. But it's not a feature as of right now in Naviance that they track. Just like one of my biggest gripes is not being able to track what program a student applied to, and not having that information unless students provide that directly to us through conversation. So sometimes it's harder. That's where that data is helpful, but not helpful.
So that student, then, if I understand you see the back end. So if the student, they have the scores, but they're not sharing them, they won't show up on the scattergram.
They will, because it will be a default feature.
Where do they get plotted then? Because isn't it usually GPA versus on one axis and the scores on the other?
Yes. So because it's pulling from our data in Naviance, it defaults to pulling both the GPA and the SAT score. What it's not showing you is, did that student have the test scores considered, or did they not have the test scores considered?
Okay, all right. So we've lost. It's too bad, but okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's really one of the things that's gotten a little funky over the last few years, because test optional really upended a lot of the different data that we used and that families used. And so I think we all feel, to be very transparent, I think sometimes less sure than we used to, or felt we're often, we don't necessarily have the same type of certainty that we might have based on our prior experience, because there's so much that's different with the number of students applying being so drastically different, and then the data that colleges are looking at to make their decisions being so different. It's been really challenging. Yeah. Wiley, were you going to say something?
Oh.
Okay.
I was just gonna add that, something that you can do in a lot of colleges, either right on their website, if you put in like, student profile for such and such college, it will give your student, an idea of a SAT or ACT range at least. So what is the range that they're seeing for that particular college? And then as you talk to admission counselors, sometimes it takes a little digging for certain majors, but you can find that information just to at least give yourself a guideline. Your student can have a little bit of a guideline around whether they sort of fit in that range or not.
Okay, so I just launched a quick poll. If you wouldn't mind taking just a moment to fill it out. It always helps us to know where we're doing, what we should do more of, what we should do less of. So please just take a moment. It's just 3 questions, so it's nice and easy. Happy to answer any other questions that folks have. One person commented, I imagine since it's optional to submit, scores will now likely be inflated. Yes, we've seen that. Because it's optional, typically test scores are skewed a little bit higher. And so we recommend that students look at the prior year, find the middle 50% of SAT or ACT scores. And if their scores fall within that, they think they're helpful to send them. This is very oversimplified, but it definitely has made it a little bit different. And so for some students, they might have been in the ballpark of that middle 50% a couple of years ago, but it's definitely skewed a little higher at this point. Maybe someday it'll go entirely away. We'll see. But so, oh, I'm so glad this has been helpful. Thank you. And we're so happy that you're here, and I'm so happy to help as you take this journey. All right, we'll hang around another minute or two for folks to answer any other questions. Feel free to come off mute if you'd like, and I will stop recording. Thank you all. Have a lovely evening.